And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pumpkin Copter Cast, the only video game show. So today I am joined by a recent PAX goer and game worker honor, Mark.
Hello.
And we'll start with the standard, who you are and what you do in regards to the game.
Sure. Okay, so my name is Mark Laframboise. I'm one of the co-founders of Lightning Rod Games. So we're a small indie studio based out of Southern Ontario in Canada. Um, and so my personal role is on the team. I'm in charge of biz dev and game design. And
Mm,
my other co-founder Steven is our programmer, and we also have an art director, a 3D artist, and an animator working for us.
okay, so when did you first become interested in games?
I've been interested in games since I was about probably like 4 or 5. I remember there's this game on PC, and this is interesting. See if any of your listeners recognize this game. But there was a game on PC called Playroom, which I played when I was about 4 years old, and that was the very first video game I ever really played. It was like this I remember Pepper the Mouse, and it came with like a little stuffed animal thing. It was really cool. But that was where I first started playing video games. When I first started wanting to make video games, I was probably about let's say about 10 or 12. So I started learning how to program. So I did, it was like Logo, which is where you have like the turtle and you like teach it to do like the different directions and stuff like that. That was the
Mm-hmm.
very first thing I started programming. But I knew I really wanted to make games probably since then. So a lot of the stuff I basically did throughout high school and university was just to kind of get prepared for that. So I went to the University of Waterloo for software engineering. End up finishing my degree there. I ended up doing a honors psychology and computer science. That was what I ended up graduating with because I really wanted to get more into the design side. Once I started kind of getting into the nitty gritty of some of the software engineering aspects, I realized that it was more low level than I really wanted to do on the game side. I really wanted to do high level game design
Mm-hmm.
and work with like UX and things like that. So I ended up switching to psychology to kind of get a little bit more background on how to do like user testing and stuff like that. It was really useful for that. So that was kind of my background in terms of how I decided to get into games.
Okay, and what would you say were your favorite game and or games growing up?
So I never had a console when I was a kid. So all the games I played were basically PC games. So I was really into adventure games when I was a kid. So all the LucasArts adventure games, so like Secret of Monkey Island, the Sierra adventure games, so all the King's Quest games as well. I used to play a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the game that really was like this is the game that really probably was the most influential in my decision to work in games was Grim Fandango. I really enjoyed like that game, just like seeing like the story, the ability for games to tell a really compelling story. That was really the first game that kind of had that influence on me.
Okay, and what would you say your favorite game and or games are now?
Hmm. Well, now I bounce around. I play a lot of different types of games. Mostly kind of just also to kind of see what else is on the market and what people are doing. Um, I still really like puzzle games. Like if I'm playing a single player puzzle game, I really enjoy those. And then I also really like playing cooperative games, cooperative RPGs especially. So a long time ago, I don't really play it as much anymore, but I got really into WoW probably when I was in university. And then more recently, I've been playing Destiny 2 with a good friend. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Anthem's about in a couple weeks. And other games I'm playing right now, I've been playing Hollow Knight. It's been really fun. I really like that exploration aspect to the game. It's like the parts of Dark Souls I enjoy, which is like the exploration and stuff like that. Without like, I don't like the tedium of the Dark Souls boss fights. It kind of is a nice combination where you get the exploration, but not that aspect of the games I don't enjoy. So Hollow Knight's been really cool.
Mm-hmm. So, when did you first get into game design?
I first got into game design after school. After I graduated, I moved out to Vancouver because around 2009, that was really where a lot of the game industry in Canada was based out of, was in Vancouver. And so I went out there to try to see if I could get into the industry, and I ended up working. My very first job in the industry was at Propaganda Games, which was as dev support, which was like integrated QA effectively. I worked on the canceled Pirates of the Caribbean RPG. Which, there's a little bit of stuff out there about it. It was interesting, but yeah, I was only there for I think 6 weeks before they canceled the entire project. So that was a pretty interesting kind of introduction to the game industry. Like joined a AAA team and then 6 weeks in, it just got canceled after they've been working on it for like 5 years. I felt really bad for some of the people who worked on it. Um, and then after that, I kind of applied for some jobs at some smaller studios. So there was a studio that was hiring a game designer to do like application pitches for funding. So it was kind of like I worked on helping them develop the pitch to try to see if they could get the funding. And if they got it, I would have got paid if I wasn't getting paid while I was working on it. They ended up getting the funding, but I got a lot of really cool experience like doing game design, like writing the design specs and things like that, and kind of learning how to work with the rest of the team on the design side. That was really useful. I was able to leverage that into another position that was paid at another studio in Vancouver, where I was also doing a little bit of production. So I was an assistant producer on a couple other things that they were working there. Um, all of those projects got canceled. That was a little bit longer. It wasn't that long. It was probably only about 4 or 5 months later. All that stuff kind of got canceled. They had some layoffs. So within the first 10 months in the industry, I worked for 3 different studios and got laid off twice. So that was really rough. And then I was really fortunate. I only really applied to one place in the United States, and that was Disney Interactive in Palo Alto. And it's because Propaganda was Disney owned at the time I worked there. And I really liked how they treated the employees. Like after everyone got laid off, they paid out the rest of my contract. I had a 16-week contract. I worked 6 weeks. And they paid me for the remaining 10. Like, I thought it was really, if you got to cancel a project, treating your employees well was something that I thought was pretty well done. So there's also the cool perks. You get to go to like Disney parks and stuff for free and things like that, which is kind of fun.
Sounds good.
So that was the only place I applied in the States, and that was where I ended up getting a job. So I went down to Palo Alto for about a year and a half as a game designer on some of their Facebook and mobile games. So the game I was I worked on for most of the time I was there was this game called Words of Wonder,
Hmm.
which is kind of the best way to describe it is it's Candy Crush meets Spell Tower. So it's like you kind of find words in a grid, and then depending on the length of them and like the shape of them, it kind of blows up the letters in the grid and gives you like bonuses and stuff like that. So I worked on a lot of the systems design. So a lot of the like what are the scoring multipliers, like how does everything work there with combos, what are some of the special powers you get and stuff like that. That was mostly my job there. And so I worked there for a year and a half. And throughout that whole time, I had met Steven, my co-founder, in university. So before we moved out to Vancouver, we'd been talking about like we wanted to start our own studio, but we wanted to go work in the industry for a bit. So while I was at Disney, Steven was at Electronic Arts Vancouver, working in their motion capture studio as a
Hmm.
software engineer. And so we were there, and we both gotten, at that point we had about 3 years experience. We're like, we really want to start our own studio. So we kind of picked a date. We're like, all right, January 2013, we're gonna start our own studio. We're just gonna like move back to Ontario and start it there. And so we did. We basically went home. We let our bosses know. Actually, we really both liked our jobs. It was really tough because we both really enjoyed where we were. We really liked the people we were working with and working for. So we ended up giving them. Both of us gave them really long notice. We actually told them both in the summer. We're like, we're gonna go back for Christmas, and that's it. We're done when we go back for the holidays. So we gave everyone notice. We went back for the holidays, and then yeah, we started the studio in January 2013.
Huh.
Yeah.
Mm. Which brings us to the main meat and potatoes of this is like if we were at a PAX and a passersby wandered by your booth, like what would be the summary you'd give them as to what the game is?
Sure. So the game we're working on right now is called A Fold Apart, and the way we describe it, it's a puzzle game about a long distance relationship in a world of folding paper. So it sounds really interesting. That usually is enough to get people who are walking by to kind of grab their attention and maybe try the game out. Um, but I can give a little bit of background to it. So when I was in California working for Disney, my wife was still in Ontario, and so we were apart for about a year and a half. And so that long distance relationship was, oh, there's a lot of ups and downs that you go through when you're living apart from someone like that. And I always thought that was interesting for a story of a video game. I thought it would be kind of neat to make a game about a long distance relationship. And I didn't know how to do it at first. Like I didn't want to just make a game that had that story. I wanted it to be both the story and mechanics that helped reflect, the feeling of being apart from someone.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have that first. And then 1 year after GDC, Steven and I were just brainstorming cool game mechanics. We're just like, what are things that we haven't seen in games that would be kind of cool? And one of the ones that he thought of was folding paper, like the back of a Mad magazine, where you like fold it, like one picture, you fold it, you make a new picture.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was interesting. I'm like, I don't really know what the inherent gameplay is there. But then a few months later, I realized we could combine them because folding paper is a really good metaphor for being in a long distance relationship. Because you have a piece of paper, you have a character living on one side of a piece of paper, and you have another character living on the other side of that piece of paper. They're effectively in two different worlds and they can't interact with one another. But if you fold the paper, you can merge the two worlds together. And I thought that was like a good representation of what it feels like when you're apart. Because usually in a long distance relationship, you're both there for reasons that are kind of outside your control. You don't really want to be physically apart, but you have to either because of like work or school or family or things like that. And you just kind of wish you could merge the two physical locations together so you could be together. And I thought that was kind of like what folding paper sort of felt like. And that ended up being the kind of idea that sparked off the whole game of what we're trying to do.
Okay. And yeah, that kind of answered the next two questions.
I think so, yeah.
Yep. So you also kind of explained, why the folding mechanic, but when you first started making the game, was the paper folding mechanic already something you wanted to put in, or did you felt like that would help with the like story and the setting you wanted to have the game be?
Yeah, we actually did a lot of exploration early on. Like it ended up being, ultimately the initial idea was long distance relationship. And I want to do that. But when we thought of the folding paper, we actually did explore a few other things there. So one of the first things was the original scope of the game was that every puzzle was its own like standalone piece of paper. So it was just these two characters, and the whole point of that puzzle was just to get the two characters together. It wasn't like this ongoing story really, but it didn't feel. It felt like it was a bit too much, too limited scope. It felt more like puzzle games that you play on mobile, where they're very like one puzzle after another, like cut the rope and like Angry Birds and things like that.
Mm.
So we wanted to expand the scope because we really wanted to put the game out on PC and console. So we're like, we need to make the scope a little bit bigger, make it feel more like the puzzle games that are on those platforms. And that was where we started exploring with like, it wasn't originally even about a couple. There was parts where we were like, well, what if they're just like these two creatures that live in like literally different worlds? Like it was like almost like alien worlds, and they were both in their own world, and they would fold the paper and they would meet each other. And it was almost like these genderless kind of like characters, like sort of like Wally and Eva. And it was like they're not human, but they had like human-like qualities to kind of give them some emotional depth. So that was where we really originally started. There was one part where we actually were exploring this idea of like, well, what if we made like a different genre completely? Like, what if we did like an RPG with folding? And so there's like this top-down RPG where it was like the floor was the paper, and you would walk on the paper, and then you'd fold it or flip it over. And that one never really got any traction. It just never felt right. Like it felt like you want to do a lot of exploration more than puzzle solving in that type of environment.
Mm-hmm.
And when you fold the paper, it makes the paper smaller. So then, like when they connect, it feels weird. It just felt really weird when you're trying to like traverse it. So like, no, the puzzle game probably is still the best way to do the mechanic. And then I was like, well, ultimately it's about my own long distance relationship. Like, why don't we just like lean into it entirely and just tell that story? And so originally it was that way. It was like, okay, let's make it about a couple that's in a relationship. And from there, when we started exploring this idea of like, okay, well, if we're going to have them kind of walk through papers, which is what they do now, where it's like you have these papers that you walk through, they live in this world of paper, and then they get the puzzles that are folding paper and they continue onwards. We wanted to try to frame that well. So the framing in the way that it works in the game now is like you have these two characters, they're in a long distance relationship, they live in this world of paper, and they're communicating with each other. Because that's one of the things when you're in a long distance relationship, like you'll communicate, and as a result, very often you'll miscommunicate or have misunderstandings. And so those kind of create these emotional moments, and that's what we explore in the game now, where it's like when this misunderstanding happens or like a player feels really strongly emotional, they kind of go into this emotional world, and that's where the puzzles exist. The puzzles are almost like a manifestation of their negative emotions that they have to work through. And so like getting over these obstacles and things like that is one of the ways that they're working through the problem. So that's kind of the method for the storytelling now in the game.
Okay, and when I was playing it at PAX, I noticed that there's a few different ways to fold a particular level, where the like different types of like puzzle folding. Was that something also in the beginning, or is that something you added later on in its development to give the puzzles a little bit more variety?
Yeah, so one of the cool things about the game being about folding paper is all of the puzzle design I actually did on real paper. So like I have a stack of grid paper on my desk right now, and it's just a bunch of it's literally every puzzle in the game, and then a whole bunch of puzzles that we kind of experimented with. And so it was really neat because like iterating through puzzle design was always pretty straightforward early on. If I thought of an idea, I could test it. And then what we built was Stephen built the system in Unity where it's effectively like almost like a digital grid. So I could like draw out the levels I designed, just basically draw in the platforms, drop in the players, drop in like the stars that you have to collect to finish the puzzle and stuff like that. All the obstacles, things like that. I could just drop them in this level and do like a gray box testing of it just to see if the prototype of the puzzle worked once you kind of translated it to a digital medium. And so that's like kind of our process. I draw it on paper, test it digitally, and then if the puzzle felt good, then we can pass it off to art and they can like decorate it nicely. So sometimes it's like it worked really well. Like a lot of the mechanics that work on paper end up working really well in the game, like in the digital version as well. So like we have folding. You can fold from horizontally. You can fold later on. This wasn't in the demo that we brought to PAX because that was just a tutorial. But
Mm-hmm.
like later on, you can fold from the top, so you can use gravity, so you can like drop both the players and like pushable blocks and things like that. From you can drop them down. You can fold diagonally, which also lets you start rotating things as well. And then later in the game, you can also rotate the entire paper. You can like just take the paper and rotate it in like 90-degree increments and start doing stuff like that. And then so we just combine all those mechanics together in the game. It ends up feeling really good. Like some of the puzzles near the end of the game are pretty tough, but I think pretty fair. I think we've taught all the mechanics by the time you get to them.
Okay, and when would you say is the estimated day of release when it will be available for all the gaming public?
So it's coming out. We don't have a set release date yet. We're still trying to figure that out based on going through like some console certification and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be out spring 2019 on PC and Switch, and then it's going to come out on PS4 and Xbox later in the year. And we don't have any other platforms announced right now. We do want to get it out on as many platforms as possible, but we probably would have something to announce on that maybe towards the end of the year.
Okay. And yeah. So, time for the favorite question, which everyone always understands, and there's never any confusion about ever. In your opinion, Mark, is video games?
I think video games are, yes.
Yeah. All right then. And there's one last thing. Another thing I noticed, and that I'm willing to bet a few other people to notice, is that in the game you get to choose a set of the person working and the long distance partner, and you can
Oh
also
yeah.
yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I can talk
you
about
go
that a
ahead.
little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you.
so the
Oh,
characters in the
sorry.
game, there's an architect and a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So the architect is the character is kind of moved away to work in the city while the teacher's still working in town. And so one of the things, like originally the idea was based on myself and my wife, but we really wanted the game to be relatable to anyone who played the game. And so one of the kind of decisions that we made, and I'm really happy with it, and I think it's out really well for us, was to kind of create these presenting genders of each of the 4 characters. We never actually refer to genders in the game, but like you can basically choose which gender each of the characters is to kind of match your own personal preference for what characters you want to tell the story of. And yeah, it was really a big deal. Like we really, as a studio, it really means a lot to us to try to create games that are as inclusive and encouraging of diversity as we can. So that was one of the ways that it really wasn't a lot of extra work on our end to make that work, but it has a really big payoff to players who play the game. And we always get a lot of appreciation from players when we bring it to conferences, saying like, thank you for making a game that lets them play it the way that they want to, which is it's good to see. And it's disappointing that more games don't, but I'm happy that we're able to be part of the solution for it, I think.
Yeah. I remember someone in a Destructoid article mentioning that this would be a day one purchase for them if that was the case, and they were very excited when they found out that it was the case.
Yeah.
And yeah, with that little extra piece of information, that brings us to the conclusion of this particular episode of the Pumpkin Copter Cast. I'd like to thank Mark for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here, Tyler.
You're welcome. So yes, a fold apart, as an AFOLD apart. So somewhere around, like you said, spring of this year.
Yep, sometime between the end of March and the end of June. That's when it's going to be coming out on PC and Switch.
I guess sometime around then it'll be on PC and Switch, and the 2 other consoles later in the year. Be sure to follow them on the Twitters. I believe it's at A Fold Apart.
It's at LRG Thunder is our main Lightning Rod Games one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So follow them there. If any of the -7 people listening to this and enjoyed this, feel free to like and subscribe. On the rare occasions I post anything worth paying attention to, you can follow me on the Twitters at tgorman83. And yep, this has been the Pumpkin Copter Cast, the only video game show. And we will see you later.